You know, ladies and gentlemen, in recent days we did a podcast on the 1951 B-movie classic, The Son of Dr. Jekyll. But this was a sequel, and what was kind of ironic, ladies and gentlemen, it was only one of two or three werewolf movies that were officially released in the States in the 1950s. It's called Daughter of Dr. Jekyll. Now, if this was filmed in color, it would have done a lot better at the box office, but it was in a low-budget black and white. It was produced by Jack Polifexen, directed by Edgar Ulmar, and released by Allied Artists. The film is a variation of the 1886 Gothic novella Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Now, this one stars well, call her an actress would be hard go. Gloria Talbot, John Agar, and Arthur Shields. In the film, Janet, played by Talbot, learns that she's not only the daughter of the infamous Dr. Henry Jekyll, but is convinced by her guardian, Dr. Lomas, Arthur Shields, that she's inherited her father's transformative condition. Janet begins to believe that she turns into a monster after two local women are found horribly killed, and nearly takes her own life because of it. However, all is not what it seems. Daughter of Dr. Jekyll was released in theaters in the U.S. on a double bill with the Cyclops, because of course Talbot was in that movie as well. Now there's various running times and 75 minutes. Now, some scenes were extended for the syndication release to meet the late night, 75-minute to 90-minute movie block. Now, in this one, in the mid-1910s, Janet and fiancé George, played by Agar, arrive at the English manor house that Janet will inherit the next day when she turns 21. They meet Mrs. Merchant, the housekeeper, Jacob, the groundskeeper, and Maggie, Janet's personal maid. Oddly, Maggie is frightened and in a hurry to get home before the moon rises. Jen and George also meet Dr. Lomas, played by Arthur Shields. Get it? Lomas? Anyway. Lupine. She and George had decided to marry as soon as possible. Lomas says that her decision is rash, and then announces that in addition to the house, Janet is inheriting a sizable fortune and a huge estate. He also says ominously that he has another inheritance explained in the morning. The next morning, Janet and George discover a hidden laboratory in the house. When he asks Lomas about it, he refuses to say anything until George leaves the room. When George does, Janet returns from the lab. She tells him that the wedding is off because Lomas has told her that she's the daughter of the werewolf Dr. Jekyll. After Lomas takes him to the family crypt to see Jekyll's tomb, Janet says that she fears passing on the madness to her and George's future children. When George asks if that's possible, Lomas says that there's no proof one way or the other. Now, when Lomas hypnotizes Janet that night under a pretense of checking her for shock, before she goes to bed, Maggie tells her that tomorrow's night full moon marks the night that the monster Jekyll rises from his tomb. Janet has a nightmare in which she sees a monster woman kill another woman. Once awake, she finds blood in her hands and nightdress, and when she looks in the mirror, she sees the monster woman looking back. Now, Merchant serves breakfast the next morning, complaining that Maggie and Jacob are late for work. Jacob then appears, carrying Maggie's body. She was killed on her way home last night, according to Jacob, by a werewolf. That night, Lomas doses Janet with brandy and drug-laced milk before she goes to bed. Janet has a second, longer nightmare in which the monster woman kills Lucy in the woods while leaving the young man she's with unharmed. Janet awakens and finds blood in himself. In the morning, Jacob glares accusingly at Janet as he says, "We found Lucy with her throat torn out by her." Merchant resigns, too afraid to stay in the manor house any longer. Janet's by now in deep distress. She begs George to lock her up or put her in a nut house, then hysterically cries, "If you love me, please kill me," threatening that if he won't, she will. George puts her back to bed, but she slips away. As he searches for her, Janet killing herself, saying that most suicide threats are just talk. You find Janet at the family crypt, and with Jacob sitting nearby sharpening a wooden stake. Now, when Lomas hypnotizes Janet again and leads her back to the crypt, George follows unseen, unheard. Lomas tells Janet that she'll kill another woman that night and then hang herself over her father's tomb in regret. As George watches, Lomas transforms into a werewolf. They fight. The werewolf knocks George unconscious, then goes to the village and kills a woman as she dresses. Now, armed village men shoot the werewolf and chase it towards the crypt. George arouses Janet from her trance and explains that Lomas is the werewolf, not her, and that he's framing Janet. He framed her father because he wants the estate for himself. While the wounded werewolf and George fight in the crypt, Jacob skewers the werewolf with a wooden stake. The werewolf reverts to Lomas as it dies. So again, the vampire theme indirectly. Now, production of the film began in early November 56, about 8 months before its release. Filmed in widescreen with an aspect ratio of 1:851, so it's a good print. Talbot said in an interview the actual shooting time was something like 7 days, and that most of the filming took place not on a stage but in a house on 6th Street in L.A. near Hancock Park. She said that passing traffic can occasionally be seen through a window in the background of interior shots. Now, the car John Agar is seen driving to Manor House at the beginning of the film is a classic 1912 Ford Model T. Now, Dollar Dr. Jekyll has a virtually identical prologue and epilogue. In the beginning, after a voiceover informs viewers that Dr. Jekyll is dead, the camera cuts to a werewolf sitting in a smoking lab who cackles, "Are you sure?" in what sounds like a high-pitched woman's voice. At the end, after a werewolf is killed, the same scene is repeated, but this time, "Are you sure?" is asked in a more masculine-sounding voice. British film scholar Phil Hardy speculates that it was done in the belief that Dollar of Dr. Jekyll would be the first film in the series, which it wasn't. In the fight scene between Agar and the werewolf, uncredited stuntman Ken Terrell stood in for Shields. The monster woman version of Talbot during the nightmare scenes was also played by an unnamed stunt double. To produce an unreal effect during the nightmares, Ulmer set the action in a wooden region that had recently been burned, then filmed it using ultraviolet film. Reflecting the film's low budget, screams heard during the nightmares came from a convenient and valuable resource known as the sound effects library. Now, Daughter of Dr. Jekyll is one of 35 films related to the Stevenson novella and released between 2008 and 2005, according to a filmography compiled by Dr. Michael Deloyd of Washington State. It is only one of 3 werewolf movies made in the U.S. during the 50s, the other 2 being The Werewolf and I Was a Teenage Werewolf, both classics. Now, Daughter of Dr. Jekyll was released in the U.S. in the second half of a double feature with The Cyclops, in which Talbot also starred, on July 28, 1957. The movie opened a period of years in different countries, including Mexico in 1957, Italy in 1959, and in Austria and West Germany in 1963. Film was released in theaters on unspecified dates in Belgium, France, Brazil, Greece, Serbia, and Spain. It was re-released to U.S. theaters in 1964, 2 years after it had been syndicated to television by Allied as part of a 22-film package called Sci-Fi for the 60s. Now, Allied Artists distributed the film in the U.S. for its initial release in 1957, and again upon its re-release in 1964. Allied Artists de Mexico distributed the film to theaters there, while Macata Film Verde Bojogas handled it in Germany. Now, the television release was somewhat unusual, as the film's running time of 67, 69, or 71 minutes, depending on which version was used, was considered too short for the late night time slots. As a result, the film was expanded to approximately 75 minutes by double printing some of the film's frames to stretch out the action and lengthening Janet's nightmares with footage from Frankenstein 1970, which came in 1958. Now, Daughter of Dr. Jekyll has been available for home viewing for a number of years on Fox Video, Key Video, and World Beyond Video on VHS and DVD. Now, DVDs of the film were put out in the U.S. primarily by All Day Entertainment in 2000 and by Image Entertainment in 2003. Outside the U.S., DVDs of the movie were released by Punto Zero in Italy in 2008 and in 2009 by Bach Films in France and L'Atelier 13 in Spain. In 2012, a DVD version was released by an unspecified company in Germany. Scenes, trailers, and clips for the film are also featured in the 91 VHS documentary Wolfman Chronicles and in 2 episodes of the TV series 100 Years of Horror, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Girl Ghouls, both from the series' first season in 96. Now, reviewers seem to have been overwhelmed by the quality of the film at the time of its release. Box Office Magazine summarized events in its standing review digest in the issue of 26 October 1957. Harrison Reports, Film Daily, The Hollywood Reporter, Parents Magazine, and New York Daily News all called the film fair. Variety and Box Office itself rated it as poor. About 2 months earlier, Box Office suggested to tiered owners as a regular exploits feature that to drum up business, at the curb in front of the theater have an ambulance bearing a sign for the convenience of those who are overcome by the dual chiller thrillers, a reference to the pairing of the Cyclops and Daughter of Dr. Jekyll. Now, later critics have tended to focus on the film's inconsistencies and shortcomings. American critic Andrew Saris notes that the film has a scenario so atrocious that it takes 40 minutes to establish that the daughter of Dr. Jekyll is indeed the daughter of Dr. Jekyll. Hardy claims the film bizarre and the most unorthodox treatment of Stevenson's theme to date, but also said that Ulmer's direction is as hypnotic as ever, but producer Paul Fexon's script leaves him little room for genuine creativity. Ken Hackey, film critic for the Mountain Express Online newspaper, notes in the 2014 review of the movie, then being shown as part of a film series, that while there are obvious attempts at someone making the best film possible, given the script and budget, the film makes little sense. For example, he notes that it somehow manages to confuse Mr. Hyde with a werewolf and comes up with the screwy idea that being a drug-induced monster could be an inheritable trait. Likewise, American sci-fi film scholar Bill Warren points out the inconsistency of having the werewolf kill with a stake through the heart like a vampire. He also writes that to make a Jekyll Hyde movie and leave out Hyde seems perverse, and I tend to agree. Now, other critics, however, have more deeply explored the subtext of the film. Robert Singer suggested in a book chapter titled Nothing to Hide, Reading the Daughter of Dr. Jekyll, that the film may be read as a critically significant text within a melodramatic crisis of female identity cinema in the 1950s, with Janet treated simultaneously as a child and an adult, being dressed, undressed, put to sleep, given pills, hypnotized, and, when all else fails, she is nearly led to suicide. Singer describes the film as an identity quest set in a dare fairy tale and calls George an oafish white knight who, in fairy tale fashion, saves his princess, the innocent and persecuted heroine. Similarly, Craig makes notes of the sexual and patriarchal undertones of the movie that are reflected in Janet, who by the end of the film is legally adult and very soon to be married. He writes that Janet's first victims are young women, easily seen as sexual rivals, reinforcing the notion that this alter ego of hers is fueled in part by sexual desire suppressed. Moreover, she readily believes herself literally cursed by the sins of the father. This notion follows a time-honored patriarchal script in which the female is blamed for the sins of the male, even onto potential self-destruction. Now, Talbot and Agar also appeared to have disagreed about the worth of the movie, speaking about it in separate interviews. Talbot said that I was amazingly surprised at it. I don't think it was going to be anything. It was another of those wham-bam, thank-you-ma'am shoots, and yet it turned out to have a lot more content than I had hoped. Agar, though, said that I did that picture strictly for the money. I didn't fluff it. I did the best I could with what I had to work with, but it wasn't my cup of tea. I just didn't believe it. Nonetheless, despite its shortcomings, some critics still find the movie enjoyable, calling it immensely silly and more amusing than anything, as well as delightfully daffy and an awful lot of fun. You got to take these movies with a grain of salt. It's, the mid-1950s, late 1950s. It's rock and roll. It's the drive-in is women in poodle skirts and men with the burl cream. What do you expect to see in the theater? You can't show sex, you can't show nudity. That was only the 60s and 70s. But for John Walco and the other people, John and myself are of the generation, between 52 and 68. That's a very important generation because you watch movies of the 50s on the TV, in the 60s. You were getting a lot of the traditional 1940 classic movies. Then you had the modern drive-in movies, but you had the really strange late-night horror theater and stuff like that. So it's part of a lot of people's childhood, the Hammer movies that he's mentioned. And I also mentioned the great and stupid Canadian movie explosions, horror explosion in Canada like Cronenberg and Cannibal Girls, and Black Christmas and all that. We all have a little bit of horror in our background. But the thing is to just relieve yourself for an hour and a half by something that's so bad it's funny. And a good horror movie done well, there's a lot of subtext because it's representing a lot of things anyway. So ladies and gentlemen, it's the latest of John's request. Thank you, John. If you like what we're doing here, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share. And don't forget, between 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the afternoon throughout Canada, in the winter, sometimes in the spring, when people couldn't go out, they had these, what they call cheese movies. It could be martial arts, could be Hammer, Dan Curtis, two-star movies starring former Oscar winners, the Canadian tax break movies. Movies are meant to do one thing, entertain. If you're entertained by these podcasts, let me know with a like, comment, subscribe, or share. And don't forget, just because you like these movies doesn't mean you're just as crappy as the movies. We all got to like something, don't we? Not everybody likes Mariah Carey or Beyonce. Maybe some people like, crazy Canadian disco from the 1970s like the Rays or Patsy Gallant. Anyway, thanks for listening. Bye.